Hey everyone, Jacob Morgan here. Today I wanted to talk about 3 ways that you can start to think like a futurist. And I want to go over 3 things that futurists typically do every single day. And then hopefully you can start to do these things as well. Now, before I get started in this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It's probably floating around here, or maybe it's floating around here or down there. Somewhere there is going to be a subscribe button. If you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn or another channel, you will find a link to subscribe to the channel in the description. So go ahead and click that description or click the link in the description and you will get these videos delivered to you whenever they come out. I do these every single week on a variety of topics. So let's get into this week's topic and how to think like a futurist and how you can start to think like a futurist. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, what does a futurist even do? Some people have heard about this, some people have not heard about this. And, it's very easy to call yourself a futurist. A lot of people on LinkedIn even just change their job titles or descriptions and they just include the word futurist in their titles. And lots of people have done that. It almost feels like futurist is similar to life coach in some way, but it's not. So what futurists do is they don't predict the future, but they help make sure that individuals and organizations are not surprised by what the future might bring. So again, there's a big distinction between predicting the future, which nobody can do, versus just being able to understand what might happen in the future and being able to be prepared for that. So I studied foresight, futurism for many, many years, and I actually went back to receive my professional certification in foresight from the University of Houston. So although I read the books, I read through the methodologies, I did all that sort of stuff, but I also wanted to go back and get that certification. So I actually studied foresight. There are not many schools in the world that offer this, and there are some people out there who even have a master's degree in foresight where they really go all into a lot of these topics and concepts and how to work. And usually those people have a job doing scenario planning. I didn't go that in depth, but I still did study foresight. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. It's not something that I just slapped up on my profile. It's something that I actually studied and went to school for. So let's jump into 3 things that you can start doing every day to think like a futurist. Let's start off with number 1. We're going to talk about, there it is, looking for signals. Then we're going to talk about thinking of implications. And then we're going to look at exploring scenarios. This is going to be very high level. There are books and things that you can find online that go into much more detail about each one of those things. So let's start with the first one. Man, there we go. I got to get used to this like opposite camera thing. Looking for signals. There we go. So one of the things that futurists do every single day is they look for signals. It's oftentimes called horizon scanning, where basically what that means is you are looking for signs of something. Things that are really far out, like little distant glimmers of something that might be bigger in the future. So how do you look for those signals? People read various publications, they read articles. My favorite way, what I have found to be most effective in how I look for signals, is I talk to a lot of people. So I have a podcast called the Future of Work Podcast, where every week I interview a new senior level executive and talk to them around something related to the future of work. So you can imagine you interview one of those people every week. And in my case, I actually probably interview 2 to 3 people a week. That's already 100 senior level executives that I talk to every single year. I also speak at around 40, 50 conferences a year, and through that, I also get a chance to speak with business leaders and executives. And I'm working on a new book now on the future of leadership, where I've interviewed over 130 CEOs. Ignore the dogs. You'll notice that they're going to be in a lot of these videos. So I've interviewed over 130 CEOs at companies around the world. So I talk to many, many hundreds of business leaders and executives every single year. And that, for me, has been the most effective way to look at signals. I can identify things that maybe a lot of business leaders are starting to talk about. So, for example, when I wrote my book on employee experience that came out in 2016, it was one of the first books on the topic. I was one of the very few people to even study 252 organizations around the world to understand that topic. But the reason why I decided to write a book about it is because I looked for the signals. And back in 2016, and even earlier in 2015, when I first started doing these interviews, I would notice a lot of these executives would talk about employee experience. They started mentioning it, and there were little glimmers of it here and there, but it wasn't nearly as mainstream as it is now. So I noticed that that was a signal, and I grabbed onto that, and I thought it was going to be something that would be important in the future. And here we are 4 or 5 years later, and it is one of the most important things that organizations are focusing on. So look for those signals. Talk to people, read research reports that come out there, look at various websites that, I'm not talking about just like any random websites, but look at, Futurism is a good website, for example. Quartz is a good website. Look at those different places and see what they're talking about. See if there are trends that start to pop up here and there. The next one, think of implications. So after you look for these signals and you identify what they might be, try to ask yourself, what does that actually mean? Or maybe what could it mean? So look at something like AI, for example, artificial intelligence, right? Let's say we were 5-10 years back, right? We're in the early 2000s, maybe even in the late 90s. And more conversations are starting to happen around artificial intelligence and what it might mean for jobs and the future of work, etc. So what does that actually mean? So as a futurist, one of the first things that you do is you start to examine, okay, artificial intelligence, what might that start to mean for jobs, for individuals, for humans? In other words, you take it one step further, not just this is artificial intelligence, oh, that's great, but what does that actually mean? Where can it be applied? What are the impacts that it might have? And you need to make that jump one level further to start to try to connect the dots. So again, step one, look for those signals. Once you identify those signals, ask yourself, what do these signals mean? If those signals became mainstream, and if those signals became, like the bright star, like the sun, what would that mean? What are the potential implications that might have? And that brings us to the third thing that futurists do every day is they look at scenarios. My favorite analogy of this is a game of chess. Now, in a game of chess, one of the things that top grandmasters do is they start to think about what are the different potential moves that you could make. They don't just sit at a chessboard and say, okay, I'm going to make this move and my opponent will make this move and then I will make this move. That's not how their mind works. Instead, this is the move I'm going to make. My opponent might respond with this move or with this move or with this move or with that move. And if they respond with one of those moves, then this is how I will respond. So in other words, you're looking at different scenarios. You're looking at different possibilities instead of just trying to look at one. Again, we can think about artificial intelligence. If you were just looking at one scenario, you might say, you know what? Artificial intelligence is going to take away millions of jobs. We're going to be walking around with shotguns and pitchforks like the Walking Dead. And so you might plan everything in your life and everything for your business for that one scenario. But what happens if that scenario doesn't actually happen? What happens if instead we see new jobs are created? There's a lot of abundance and productivity and the economy flourishes. But you've spent all your time and all of your energy and all of your resources assuming that you are going to be in trouble. Okay, so this is why it's important to think of different scenarios. So ask yourself several questions. Again, we can turn it back to artificial intelligence. What happens if a lot of jobs get replaced? What happens if everything stays the same, just like it is now? What happens if maybe a ton of new jobs are created and new opportunities start to emerge? So you can start to ask yourself these different questions, and when you ask yourself these questions, you'll start to notice that different scenarios might pop up. And again, this depends on the area that you're in. You might be in marketing, you might be in operations, you might be working for yourself. So you're going to know the questions that you should be asking. But whatever those questions are, don't fixate on one answer or one solution. Explore different scenarios. So just to recap, step one, look for the signals. Talk to people, listen to podcasts, read publications that are out there, look at research reports, look at some of the trends that are starting to become more prevalent and try to understand what those trends are. Step 2, think of the implications. What do those trends mean? If you look at a research report and maybe only 3% of people are identifying as something being important, and the next year that report comes out and now it's like 10% of people say it's important, right? Imagine, extrapolate forward and assume 80% of people say that that's important. What are the potential implications for whatever that thing might be? What's the impact that it might have? So try to think in terms of that. And last, explore scenarios. Don't assume one scenario. Don't assume one future. Remember, futurists don't predict the future. We try to anticipate some of the different possibilities and scenarios that might happen. There's a ton that I could say on this. I know this video is already 10, 11 minutes long, but imagine people get an entire master's degree in this. I tried to just talk about 3 things in the span of 10, 11, 12 minutes. I hope you found it fun, informative, useful, and valuable. If you enjoy these types of videos and you want more videos where I talk about all sorts of different topics, such as this, such as how to build effective teams, how to design employee experiences, leadership, all that sort of fun stuff, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next time.